What is something you can show but can't see? Is it smell, an unfinished puzzle, or maybe it's our connection to one another? Everyone's answer is different because what we see but can't show is up to everyone's opinion. While that separates us, it is that difference that brings us together, forming bonds of camaraderie, bonds of rivalry, and bonds forged from dueling. First published onto Weekly Shonen Jump in 1996, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a manga series written and drawn by Kazuki Takahashi. It tells the story of a meek, introverted high school student named Yugi trying to solve a puzzle box that he's been working on for years. When he solves it, the spirit inside of the puzzle awakens after over 3,000 years, giving Yugi domain of the shadows, as well as granting him a wish of what he wanted the most in life: friends, allowing him to befriend his former bullies Jonochi and Honda, as well as giving him the confidence and bravery over those who try to bully and abuse him. This was done through deadly shadow games performed by the spirit living inside Yugi's Millennium Puzzle, who challenged cruel, sadistic evildoers, whether they be abusive teachers, bullying gamers, or even escaped criminals. Yugi's other half would challenge them in high-stakes games they would often lose to due to their vanity, wrath, or pride getting the better of them. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a manga about gaming. Takahashi wanted to create a shonen manga where the main character did not fight, an uncommon sight, especially in the battle-heavy world of Weekly Shonen Jump. Instead, conflict would be resolved through games, whether they be party games turned deadly, or original games inspired by real life. In addition to gaming, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is also a series about connections and the importance of camaraderie. Takahashi wanted to show the value and strength of unity. Humans have a natural tendency to work together, and through it, they form bonds that allow their own personal growth, and let them achieve feats they thought were impossible on their own. Isolating yourself away from the world can only get you so far, and it's through unity that we find the best in ourselves. But while a novel concept that did achieve some success, enough to get its own anime adaptation, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was unfortunately an unpopular series and was losing its readership. Faced with possible cancellation, one of Takahashi's editors suggested that he focus the series on an idea introduced in Chapter 9 of the manga. Chapter 9 being one of the most important parts of not just the series, but to the entire franchise, introducing two vital concepts: the character Seto Kaiba, and a card game called Duel Monsters, a collectible trading card game inspired by Magic the Gathering and Dungeons & Dragons. Both Kaiba and the card game were popular with readers, with Takahashi receiving letters from fans wondering if the card game was real. Deciding to focus on the card game itself, Takahashi went forth and expanded on the rules, monsters, and world, and made dueling with the cards the central focus of the series. The results speak for themselves. Yu-Gi-Oh! Achieved massive success and was an overnight sensation. Soon, a real-life version of the trading card was released by Konami, and eventually a second anime was adapted by Studio Gallop that was then localized overseas by 4Kids Entertainment. Despite what you may think of the localization, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a smash hit in America, and soon became a worldwide phenomenon. With toys, video games, and of course, the ever-growing card game, what was once a tribute to Magic the Gathering quickly became its competition. Yu-Gi-Oh! Along with Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z were responsible for the American anime boom of the early 2000s. Yu-Gi-Oh! Quickly found itself as one of the tentpoles of Weekly Shonen Jump. Even today, you'll still see Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards printed on the front of modern Shonen Jump covers long after the original series has ended, with the manga selling over 40 million copies, a wildly successful anime adaptation with spin-offs already planned, and a juggernaut of a collectible trading card. Takahashi was able to enjoy his success once he finished wrapping up his story for many years to come, including overseeing Yu-Gi-Oh! Spin-offs, as well as penning the sequel movie, The Dark Side of Dimensions. That was until July 7th, 2022, when the Japan Coast Guards found the body of Takahashi by the coast of Naga City, Okinawa, having died of a horrible drowning accident at age 60, his death shocking both the anime industry and pop culture as a whole. There have already been thousands of tributes and posts dedicated to the man on both YouTube and social media about how much of an impact he had, not just to the world, but also to people's personal lives as well. But his legacy cannot be overstated on just how much of an impact he had to the lives of millions who loved his work. What this video is not just my own personal tribute to the man and his legacy, but also an advocacy for those who haven't to read his original manga, because as you're about to find out, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was not just a worldwide phenomenon, it's also just an amazing manga. While everyone knows Yu-Gi-Oh! For the high-stakes card battles, like I said earlier, it started off as a manga series about a wide variety of games. This can lead to some confusion when starting with the manga, and can even lead to some deciding to skip to the first major arc focused entirely on the trading card game, as the second anime did. However, doing so would be a great disservice to what came before, as it means skipping on 3 vital story arcs: the Mystery of Shadi, Death Tea, and Monster World. 3 important arcs that leave lasting impacts on the main story all the way up till the end. Even without these, I still think that the first 7 volumes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Are worth reading, mainly just to see how Takahashi got his start with the series, as well as seeing these characters for the first time and how they grow. I mean, in the first few chapters, Yugi doesn't even have a nose, Jonochi's hair is completely different, and for some reason, Dark Yugi has onks on his wrist. Speaking of Yugi, it's important that I go over his character first before anything else. As the protagonist, Yugi starts the series off as shy, weak, and a total pushover, but over the course of the series grows and develops to become more of his own person, and to stand up for his friends and himself. One thing that doesn't change though is his kindness. When I said Takahashi wanted to create a protagonist who didn't fight to solve his problems, I meant it. Yugi's practically a pacifist. He doesn't hurt or punish a single person in the entire series. That job goes to his other self, the dark spirit living inside Yugi's Millennium Puzzle. A common misconception by fans is that Dark Yugi starts the series off as this violent serial killer who targets evil people who deserve it using twisted shadow games they can't win, like some sort of mismatch between John Kramer and the Punisher. But it's actually quite different. Dark Yugi challenges people to these shadow games while also participating in said games of high risk. He plays fairly, even when his life is in just as much danger as his opponent is. And often, it's not really that he wins, it's more as his opponent's flaws screwing themselves over in the end. Dark Yugi only really rigs his games twice. One is against the escaped prison convict that I feel pretty much every fan of the series has seen, and a griddle ice hockey game that's admittedly pretty damn unfairly rigged near the end, but it's very early on, so it's mostly forgotten about. As the series progresses, much like how Yugi learns to develop confidence in himself, Dark Yugi begins mellowing out and starts questioning the nature of his existence and where he's from, with the mystery of his past being the driving motivation for the Battle City arc. In fact, he stops inflicting penalty games to those he beats after realizing the dark origins of the Millennium items. This mystery of Dark Yugi's identity, along with his own personal growth out of stepping out of his other self's shadow, makes Yugi a fun and dynamic protagonist. You can really see his assertiveness grow throughout the series, all without losing his empathy and desire to make friends. This can best be seen as early as the first chapter, when Yugi steps in to protect Jonochi and Honda from Ushio after they are both beaten up by him. Despite Jonochi and Honda being his bullies, Yugi still stands up to protect them because he doesn't want to see people get hurt. Dark Yugi is great in his own right, smart, charismatic, and confident. He's a total power fantasy character, but of a different kind. He's not just powerful because he has the strongest weapon or hits the hardest like other battle manga character. No, it's because more often than not, he's the smartest guy in the room, and he likes to show that off through gaming, with all his crazy plays and strategies towards cheaters and shitty people. Just when you think Dark Yugi's caught in a corner, he comes up with something unique and inventive to secure his victory. Dark Yugi makes you want to root for him whenever he's up against some scumbag duelist. One of my favorite moments is when he gambles his own life against the player killer of darkness in a duel. The player killer sets up a completely impenetrable defense that seems impossible and almost unfairly set up. So what does Dark Yugi do? Predict that his opponent is going to lose in 2 turns and exploit his obsessive turtling strategy by manipulating him to funnel all his monsters into one spot, only to kill all of them in 1 turn, all the while taunting him that he's metaphorically getting lynched, and finally, for good measure, penalty games his ass with the illusion of him actually getting hanged. Yeah, you don't want to mess with this ancient spirit. But Yugi only just makes up one of the reasons for why the manga is so compelling. His best friend Jonochi contributes greatly, and I would argue he almost steals the whole damn series with his amazing character arc. While Yugi's development comes from his ability to learn to be more independent and to be more confident in his skills, Jonochi is more along the lines of the traditional shonen protagonist, loud, hot-headed, and violent, but also containing an incredible heart of gold underneath. His growth as a duelist is probably the biggest in the series, more so than Yugi, who's already a great gamer at the start. Jonochi at the beginning of Duelist Kingdom gets his ass kicked by Anzu, who doesn't even play the card game competitively. What follows is a compelling and deep emotional journey that sees him tested like never before. Realizing that his friends are what give him growth, he even omits them from giving him advice, realizing his journey to development also needs to happen on his own. Jonochi's journey to become a better duelist almost eclipses Yugi's own, because while he's a main character, Jonochi is not the main character, meaning he has a lot less plot armor and his duels are not always a guaranteed win. That means every defeat is heartbreaking, but every victory is all the more glorious because it came from Jonochi kicking and screaming his way to a win, using a deck that isn't powerful and relies on luck to succeed. And just like Yugi, Jonochi has to deal with his own fair share of cheaters and villains, all of whom he beats using his growing skill set and abilities. And to round it off, he's also a great fighter who can kick anyone's ass if provoked and sets a fucking serial killer on fire. Absolute Chad. But great heroes can only be complemented by great villains, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Has no shortage of them. It's become kind of a meme over how much darker the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga is compared to the anime, and some people think the original 6 volumes were the darkest the series ever went. They're dead wrong. In fact, I would argue it gets even darker once the card games become a major component of the story. It may not seem like it at first glance, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a horror manga, and its villains are there to remind you of that. The kind of shit they inflict onto the main characters, and even some villains, is right in line with some slasher movie villains. Pegasus is the delightfully sinister creator of duel monsters who looms over the first major arc of the series, Duelist Kingdom. He's an unfair and deceptive bastard who likes to hide that with his over-the-top facade. His deck best reflects this, starting off with silly toon monsters and then having the back end be filled with grotesque, eye-based monsters that steal the power of those it attacks. He's the kind of villain you want to see Yugi put to the ground, but the revelation of his backstory, along with his Millennium Eye, makes victory a somber affair. Marek, meanwhile, sticks to the shadows, and throughout the Battle City arc uses his mind-controlled ghouls to try and stop Yugi and take his revenge. This includes mind-controlling Yugi's own friends in sadistic lose-lose scenarios, where whoever loses dies, and forcing his own brother Rashid into summoning a fake god and sending him into a coma, despite being close to winning his duel without it. But Marek is only a red herring, for when his darker half is revealed, that shit really hits the fan. Remember when I said Yu-Gi-Oh! Was a horror manga when it came to its villains? Yeah, Dark Marek wouldn't look out of place in Chainsaw Man with the kind of horrific, fucked up things he likes to do. But no villain in the series comes close to pure, seething evil like Dark Bakura, the evil spirit within the Millennium Ring worn by one of Yugi's friends, Bakura. A truly vile scumbag and one of my favorite villains in anime, Dark Bakura starts off turning everyone into RPG game pieces and turning it into the most dangerous game of Dungeons and Dragons between him and Dark Yugi as the killer game master. After his defeat, Dark Bakura survives, remaining hiding in the dark to only appear briefly and start plotting for his greatest shadow game of all. This makes him the greater scope villain of the whole series, an evil bastard who's always there, hiding in the shadows, waiting to strike when his time is right, all the while manipulating events to happen in his favor. Every time Dark Bakura speaks, there's this affable maliciousness to it. He can talk and act like the nicest guy in the world, but you can still feel the seething sadism from his words. It's like even when Dark Bakura loses, he still wins in the end. But that's not the reason why he's such a good villain. It's because he's a twisted, dark answer to the themes of unity. Dark Bakura fakes a redemption arc to Yugi and his friends and tries to act like he's genuinely turned good, manipulating and exploiting Yugi's desires to make friends as well as the manga's themes of bonds and unity. Dark Bakura isn't evil because he hates those ideas, but because he wants to corrupt those ideas and turn unity into oblivion. His monsters reflect that nihilistic answer to friendship, with Diabound being this twisted beast who cannibalizes other monsters without consent to grow stronger. Okay, I spent this long without mentioning him, so here I go. What can I say about Seto fucking Kaiba that hasn't already been said? Originally a one-shot villain introduced along with the card game, Kaiba became the main villain of the Death T arc, and then eventually ascended to become the arch-rival to Yugi. Powerful, rude, and arrogant, Kaiba works as the perfect foil to Yugi. While Yugi is someone who wishes to be friends with everyone, Kaiba sees bonds and unity as crutches for the weak, and eschews them in favor of becoming the best all on his own. He starts the series off as a completely evil dick, then grows to become a slightly less evil dick who cares for his brother. Kaiba has gone on to become the ultimate blueprint of how to make the perfect shonen rival. If you watch any modern shonen anime and see an aloof, distant rival, just know that no matter how similar or different they may be, they all share Kaiba's DNA. His popularity almost matching the card game itself, to the point he got top billing in the sequel movie made over a decade after the series concluded. In my opinion, I view Kaiba as part of the big three Shonen Jump rivals, but Kaiba outclasses every Shonen rival in terms of just how obsessive he is towards beating Yugi. This man will literally do anything for his salty run back, and will do it in the most extra way possible, because he's Seto Kaiba. He doesn't give a fuck what you think. Motivated by a desire to kill his past and to move forward using his own technology and wealth so that he can be the one leading tomorrow, more than violence, more than war, Kaiba views gaming as the pinnacle of conflict and equates defeat to the admins of death. In his own words, do you know what God gave to the people so they could play games in this world? A single chip called life. No matter what, he will get what he wants and is completely unfettered by what rules or society has to say about it. This is Seto Kaiba's world, and we're all living in it. Along with the characters, another aspect of the series that grows is the art. One of the reasons why I recommend reading the series is being able to see Kazuki Takahashi's art grow and change throughout the years. When he first started out, characters had big hands, giant mouths, and disproportionate figures, but as the series continued, his art soon adopted a very hard, angular style to it. There's just a real sharpness to it all that's hard to describe, but makes everything just look so damn cool, from the characters to the monsters to the technology. Seeing Takahashi combine this melting pot of fantasy, technology, and Egyptian mythology into the games and characters is just so damn fascinating to witness. This all culminates in the last arc in the series, the Millennium World, which has some of the most beautiful looking art I've seen in a shonen manga, with genuinely inspired spreads and beautifully horrific monster designs. If you want to see just how far Takahashi has come, then check out some of his newer designs for the Bankobans, released years after the original series has concluded and with all new covers. The amount of detail in them is unimaginably beautiful. So how about we actually talk about the card game now? Yeah, almost 20 minutes into this video, and I haven't even brought much attention to the real reason why Yu-Gi-Oh! Became a success. Yu-Gi-Oh's themes and characters are what makes its core identity, but it's the card game that really was the glue that kept everything together, as well as made it stand apart from the rest of its contemporaries. The problem with creating a non-battle shonen is that there must be a good hook that keeps the readership engaged to want to keep continuing through to the next week. All battle animes have to have a good hook, but I would argue non-battle ones need it even more because they can't fall back on cool fighting. So finding a good foundation is even more important for them. Yu-Gi-Oh!, or rather Duel Monsters as the manga calls it in universe, became the foundation that held the series together. It gave conflict in the story a consistent means of resolution, as well as introducing something very important to the series, a clear power system. Every time there's a duel in Yu-Gi-Oh!, we get to see the deck of each character dueling come to life, and most importantly, each deck reflects the character and what they represent. For example, Yugi runs a balanced strategist deck focusing on dark monsters and sorcerers, with the focus being his signature card, the Dark Magician. Not only does this jack-of-all-trades deck show off the basic fundamentals of the card game to the audience, such as making use of weaker monsters for powerful damage, and stalling opponents with magic cards to fire back with powerful higher-level monsters, but the cards Yugi uses reflects his own nature. Dark and mysterious, almost occult-like creatures and beasts that look evil at first, but are on the side of good. This gives the audience a much clearer look into who Yugi really is. Meanwhile, Kaiba's deck is about overwhelming power and deck destruction filled with brutal monsters, powerful machines, and of course the Blue Eyes White Dragon. For Kaiba, it's not just about winning, it's about dominance, and his deck represents his fierce pride and ego perfectly. And that's not even getting into decks like Jonochi's that combines tough-looking warriors with gamble and luck-based supporting cards to outmaneuver and outguile his opponents due to not having access to expensive powerful cards, or Dark Maric's Immortality deck that combines relentless play of Monster Reborn along with torture cards to inflict real-life damage onto his opponents, and you can see why the card game became so popular. Everyone has their own unique set of cards that give them personal identity. It's kind of like a fighting game where each character plays differently and has their own moves and combos. Each duelist has their own deck with its own set of rules and mechanics. It also helps that these duels are fast. I mean much faster than traditional card games because there's no resource management other than life points. That means that each turn of a duel is like an elaborate mousetrap of two players trying to control for dominance. One turn a character can be on the verge of winning, only for a well-placed combo of trap and magic cards to immediately turn the tide of victory into their opponent's side. It makes for an unimaginably addictive read, with each duel having you glued to the pages of what's going to happen next, what crazy plays you're gonna pull off. Combine the high stakes of the shadow games in the story along with the lightning quick pace of the duels, and you have a power system that acts as violent games of chess between the heroes and villains. My personal favorite duel, Yugi vs Jonochi at the docks. It's a perfect representation of what makes the series great. A high stakes duel between two best friends, with each turn making your heart race over what's going to happen, with one of the most emotionally impactful final turns in the series. Just pure peak fiction all around. Now, at this point you might be wondering why I'm only talking about the manga and not recommending the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime instead. After all, it is the same story with the same characters with the benefit of animation, voice actors, and music, right? Well, yes, that's true. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime does have those benefits. The voice acting is great, the music is incredible, and the animation can be really solid. But also, keep in mind that the anime everyone knows is not a complete adaptation of the source material. It completely skips over the first 7 volumes of the manga and tries to condense it all down to Yugi and Kaiba's duel at the beginning of the series to set up the first arc. That means Yugi's introduction, his friendship with Jonochi, him solving the actual Millennium Puzzle, all get pushed to the side to be explained offhandedly. In addition, the content they do adapt has all these little problems to it that just bother me. Like the character Ryuji Otogi having his motive changed from him trying to win approval from his abusive father to some half-hearted revenge scheme about Pegasus, or the nonsensical inclusion of having Jonochi versus Yugi in the Duelist Kingdom finals, which makes zero sense story-wise, as Yugi is literally trying to save his grandpa's soul, to aesthetic changes like the giant dueling arenas in Duelist Kingdom making no logical sense in the anime compared to the more practical dueling boxes in the manga. These aren't issues on their own, but when you add them all up, they do become problems. Combine that with much more bloated duels, Pot of Greed is used all the goddamn time in the second half, while it's used only once in the manga, and the relentless filler arcs, some of them being whole seasons of filler, and in my opinion, you get an adaptation that's just not as good as the original. And don't fucking get me started on the 4Kids dub. Look, I know it's nostalgic. I watched it too when I was younger, but it needs to be said that it's practically a butcher cut of the series, with a lot of line rewrites and backstories being heavily altered and changed to create practically a different series. It makes me so mad knowing people would rather skip out the manga that has a much better story, characters, and duels than the anime, all because it's not given enough attention that it deserves. So, how do I wrap this up? I've said before that the core themes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is camaraderie, that we are united by the bonds we make with our fellow humans, and that's what guides us into making our own individual growth. Believe it or not, that rings true with the real-life Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game. Unlike other card games, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a separate deck called the Extra Deck, where special monsters that can only be summoned under specific conditions are stored. This makes strategies and plays much different than other collectible card games, allowing for more variety and deck synergy. But most importantly, Yu-Gi-Oh! Does not have a set rotation. If you don't know what a set rotation is, in order to avoid power creep and to keep the meta stable, long-running card games like Pokemon and Magic the Gathering rotate older cards out of the meta. And before I say anything else, I just want to say that set rotations are not a bad thing, especially for card games that have decades of history behind them. It keeps the game fresh and avoids major power creep issues. Where am I going with this? That means apart from cards banned in tournament play, every card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Always have some value or worth to them. On their own, they don't mean much. You can't win Yu-Gi-Oh! With one card, no matter how powerful it is. But when combined with other cards, you can create something truly powerful on your own, using cards that may not seem like they work together at first. And isn't that just the entire message of Yu-Gi-Oh? That things are not always what they are, and that through unity we can see the deeper insides of people we think we know? It's through bonds that we grow beyond who we are, and into people we never thought we could be. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a story about how an introverted teen who just wants to have some friends can learn to say goodbye. How a rough but loyal delinquent can learn to better and appreciate himself through his friends, and how a man who had abandoned everything warm in his heart can find his humanity again, thanks to the one thing he could never abandon, his love for his brother. All thanks to the power of bonds. Bonds that transform, better, and guide us. Bonds that last beyond history, and bonds that'll last beyond death.